Just had an interesting conversation with a student that led me to think up a TikTok idea. You see, I've got papers due right now, and I've worked through a class and a half of papers. And when it's time for me to grade papers, man, I can get so much other stuff done. I do other house projects. I randomly painted a wall blue the other day. I will do anything to not grade the papers that I'm supposed to grade, including making this TikTok. So this student went to an event yesterday where the speaker made some claims about depression, and then the student decided to do a little bit deeper dig. Sent me this link, which I'll include in the sources in this video, but it had to do with the efficacy of antidepressants. So here are two of the key findings from this study. One is that antidepressants work medium well, I'd say. We know this by using experimental designs, where we compare a control group to an experimental group who get the actual antidepressant. So here you can see, without an antidepressant, about 20 to 40 out of 100 people who take a placebo will improve over the next 6 to 8 weeks. Depression is context dependent and it's cyclical in some people, so we would expect some natural resolution there. Meanwhile, with an antidepressant, a significantly larger percentage of those 100 people would experience relief over the next 6 to 8 weeks. So the conclusion of this study is that antidepressants improved symptoms in about 20 out of 100 people. Okay. Now, let's take the possibility of a person who's experiencing depression, and they go to the doctor. The doctor says, we'd like to put you on some antidepressants. The person isn't sure, and so they decide to do their own research. What is that research going to look like? What if they, as a normal human would, what if they just started asking their friends and their loved ones? What if they posted a poll on social media? What kinds of responses would they get? They'd probably get a few different kinds of responses, right? People who are motivated to do so. So they would probably hear from people who went on an antidepressant, but didn't experience any significant relief. But look, that's accounted for in this data, right? We would expect some people who go on the antidepressant, in fact, a number of people who go on the antidepressant, not to experience significant relief. You probably also hear from some people who did experience relief, right? You also maybe hear from some people who didn't go on the antidepressant. Instead, they did some other thing, perhaps, and yet still experienced relief. What is the person who's considering going on the antidepressant? What are they to do with all this data? That's the issue with anecdotes. So an anecdote is just a personal story. It's a personal story about a particular thing. If somebody says, I went on an antidepressant and I did not experience relief, that's an anecdote, right? We've been a species for maybe 300,000 years, and for the solid 290,000 of those years, we didn't have ways to pass down knowledge or beliefs or culture outside of an oral tradition and maybe some artwork. It's only over the last 500 years, 150 years, even 50 years that we've had tools like literacy and broad understanding of the scientific method in order to test claims meaningfully and then to pass those claims down through written literature, through scientific literature, such that we can build on our knowledge. So we have evolved to be a species that relies heavily on anecdotes, but anecdotes can be significantly misleading. This is why science works better. Here's another finding from that same study. You can see that about 50 out of 100 people who took the placebo had a relapse of depression within the next 1 to 2 years. Meanwhile, if they maintained their prescription, kept steady to their prescription of antidepressant, that fell to about half. Again, good evidence that antidepressants work medium well. Scientists gather data from larger groups of people. They test a particular hypothesis, and they come to careful conclusions on the basis of that data. Bullshitters, on the other hand, tell vivid stories about a particular person, and then make sweeping conclusions on the basis of that individual anecdote. There's a big difference between the two. Of course, there's no bigger group of bullshitters than the anti-vax people, so let's take a look at how anecdotes drive that conversation. Here are the results from the Moderna phase 3 trial of the COVID vaccine. It was done on about 29,000 people. And if you look down here at the results, you can see that after following them for 120 days, it looks like 11 people out of those 14,000 got COVID over the period of that 120 days, versus with a placebo, 185. Meanwhile, who got severe COVID? 0 people who got the actual vaccine, 30 people who got the placebo. So this leads us to conclude that the Moderna vaccine was really good at preventing the contraction of COVID, and really, really good, perfect, in fact, in this particular sample, at preventing severe COVID. That's what a scientific look at the data looks like. But what would a bullshitter do? How would somebody who's hoping to take advantage of the use of anecdotes do? Here's the use of an anecdote. Remember when Nicki Minaj tweeted, "My cousin in Trinidad won't get the vaccine because his friend got it and became impotent. Also, his balls got swollen." So her cousin's friend reported swollen testicles and attributed that to the COVID vaccine. That's a vivid anecdote. I think I'm going to go with the scientific data on this one. In fact, the health minister in Trinidad and Tobago had to take time out of his day to report that, to refute the Nicki Minaj cousin ball anecdote. He's saying there's no reported cases of adverse side effects from the COVID vaccine to testicles of any person in the entire country. Oh boy. Procrastictation. I think I just created a thing.